It's funny how life can change in the blink of an eye. For me, it was when my mom chose her new family over me, disowning me, and cutting me from the will for the sake of my stepbrother. And now, years later, they're begging for my help. But I've revealed a truth that has shaken them all. Let me tell you how it all went down. I was 14 when my mom, Lisa, married Steve. Up until then, it had just been the two of us. My dad had passed away when I was 7, completely out of the blue from a heart attack. I didn't really grasp what was happening at the time. One day he was here, and the next he was gone. I remember my mom crying, trying to hold it together, but she always did what she could for me. She worked long hours as a receptionist at a dentist's office, but still made time for me to help me with my homework or cook dinner. We didn't have a lot of money, but we made it work. I always felt like we were a team. Then Steve came along. He wasn't anything special, a guy my mom met through work. He worked random construction jobs, always talking big about the projects he was supposedly working on, but I never saw him follow through on any of them. My mom, though she was in love, she'd say he was dependable, that he made her laugh, and after years of watching her struggle, I could understand that she just wanted someone to lean on. But at the time, all I could see was some guy moving into our house and trying to act like he belonged. And then there was Tyler, Steve's 17-year-old son. Tyler wasn't just part of the deal. He was the deal breaker. From the moment he walked in, I could tell he wasn't interested in being part of a family. He came with this cocky attitude, a stack of bad habits, and absolutely zero respect for the fact that this had been our home first. I thought maybe it would get better over time, that we'd adjust to each other. But it didn't. It became clear pretty quickly that nothing was going to change. Guess who was my biggest problem, Tyler? He was a lot to handle. Tyler would leave his shoes in the middle of the living room, dirty dishes everywhere, and trash all over the place. And the worst part, Steve acted like Tyler could do no wrong. If something went missing or broke, guess who got blamed? Me. One time Tyler borrowed my headphones without asking, and then left them in his gym bag, where they got smashed. When I told Steve, his response was, "Well, maybe you shouldn't leave your things lying around." I remember my face burning with frustration. I didn't say anything, but that night I moved all my important stuff into my backpack and carried it everywhere with me. If they weren't going to respect my things, I would make sure they didn't get a chance to ruin anything else. It wasn't just about the headphones, it was about the principle. How could someone so casually destroy my things and still act like it was his right? And why did no one ever call him out on it? The worst part was my mom sitting silently in the kitchen, watching it all happen without saying a word. I wanted her to defend me, to stand up for me, but all I got was the usual blank stare. I think that was the theme of those years, be the bigger person. Tyler would throw these huge parties while Steve and my mom were out, and I'd get yelled at for not cleaning up after his friends. The next morning, I left the mess exactly as it was. Sticky floors, empty cups, everything. When Steve and my mom came home, I was sitting in the kitchen eating cereal, pretending nothing had happened. Steve shot me a glare and muttered something about responsibility, but I didn't flinch. Let them clean it up for once. Then came something I didn't expect. My mom and Steve announced they were expecting a baby. A few months after getting married, they told me I was going to have a little brother. When they made the announcement, Steve grinned like he'd already won Dad of the Year. My mom was practically glowing, clutching his arm like this was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Meanwhile, I sat frozen at the dinner table, picking at my food, fighting the lump in my throat. This wasn't joy. It was a warning, another reminder that there was no room for me in this new family. When Ethan was born, everything shifted, and not in my favor. The house turned into a baby center. Steve and my mom were constantly running around baby-proofing everything, while the rest of us were expected to just adapt. I started noticing small changes at first. A crib being assembled in the living room, stacks of diapers in the hallway, and boxes of baby supplies taking over the kitchen counter. One evening after dinner, Steve made an announcement. "We're going to need to rearrange some things for the nursery," he said, glancing at me. "It just makes sense for us to use the bigger room." I froze. I knew exactly what he meant. My room was about to be taken from me. The next weekend, Steve and my mom barged into my room with boxes and trash bags. "We'll just move your things into the guest room," they said, as they started hauling my stuff out like I was being evicted. Steve kept tossing out lines about family sacrifices. But if anyone was sacrificing it, sure wasn't the guy who was stealing my room for a crib. It felt like a robbery. They barged in like amateur movers on a tight deadline, tossing my stuff into boxes and dismantling my room before I could even process what was happening. At least thieves have the decency to do it when you're not home. I stood there frozen, gripping the doorframe as my world shrank into a cold, dark room down the hall. I spent the rest of the day moving my things into the guest room while they transformed my old room into the perfect nursery. Getting booted to the guest room was like being sent to the penalty box in my own house. No desk, no shelves, and the heater barely worked. Guess I should have been grateful they didn't shove me in the garage. When I tried to set up my study materials, Steve came in and told me to keep the clutter to a minimum because the room needed to stay tidy. Now we had Tyler the golden boy, who could do no wrong, and Ethan, the new center of attention. Meanwhile, I was just there. I tried to talk to my mom about it once, but she got defensive and said I was being selfish. "This is your family now," she said. "You have to make it work." But it never worked. Steve treated me like a nuisance. Tyler was a constant source of stress. And my mom was too busy trying to keep everyone happy to notice how miserable I was. By the time I was 15, I had figured out that no one in the house was going to look out for me. My mom was too caught up in keeping Steve happy. Steve had no interest in me unless it was to point out something I'd supposedly done wrong, and Tyler, well, he was just doing his thing, acting like a king in a house I didn't even feel like I belonged in. So I adapted. I stopped trying to fit into their version of a family and started focusing on getting through each day. I wasn't rebellious or defiant. I wasn't sneaking out or breaking rules. I just made myself invisible. School became my safe zone. I joined every club that would take me to keep myself busy. I stayed after school to work on projects or hang out in the library. One day after one of these clubs, Mr. Jacobs, our advisor, stopped me randomly. "You know you've got potential, Ethan," he said, tapping a stack of papers on his desk. "But you've got to think bigger. Don't let your circumstances limit you." I didn't tell him about my home life, but I guess he could see something in me. The way he said it stuck with me. That was when I started imagining a future beyond that house, one where I could finally breathe. Sometimes I'd just wander the hallways, killing time, so I wouldn't have to go home. When I wasn't at school, I'd crash at my friend Jim's house. His parents were cool about it, and I think they could tell something was off with my situation, but they never pried. Home wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. Tyler made sure of that. He'd blast his music so loud the walls shook, invite his friends over to play video games until the middle of the night, and hog the bathroom in the mornings, so I was always late getting ready. Steve didn't care. If anything, he encouraged it. Tyler's a teenager, he'd say like that was some kind of excuse for him to act like a jerk. But there was one night that sticks with me. I came home around 8:30, exhausted after a long day at school and work. I'd started working part-time at a local coffee shop to save up for, well, I didn't know what yet, but I knew I needed money to get out eventually. Anyway, I got home, and there was a note on the counter. It said, "Went to dinner, back late. There's leftover spaghetti in the fridge. That's it." My mom, Steve, Tyler, and Ethan had all gone out for a nice dinner and didn't even think to invite me. I wasn't surprised exactly, but it still hurt. It was just more proof that I wasn't really part of their family. After that, I stopped caring about trying to connect with them at all. What was the point? I lost it finally when Tyler threw one of his infamous parties while Steve and my mom were out of town. I'd been looking forward to a rare weekend of peace and quiet, but instead the house turned into a zoo. Random people I'd never seen before were everywhere on the couch in the kitchen, even in my room. When I tried to kick them out, some guy just laughed and said, "Chill, dude. It's just a party." The next morning, my room was trashed. Someone had spilled soda all over my desk, my backpack was ripped, and my headphones were missing. I was furious. When Tyler finally stumbled downstairs, I confronted him. "You're cleaning this up," I said, my voice shaking but firm. He just laughed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You shouldn't have left your stuff lying around," he said, brushing past me. For a second, I considered grabbing him by the collar, but then I heard Steve's voice booming from the kitchen. "What's all this noise?" I knew how that would end, so I swallowed my anger and walked away, vowing that next time I wouldn't back down. That's when I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for them to change or for things to get better. They weren't going to. By the time I was 16, I was done. I'd spent years trying to get by, hoping things would get better, but they never did. It was like I was invisible in my own house, just a pawn in a game where no one had my back. Tyler was living his best life, doing whatever he wanted, and Steve was just his cheerleader, constantly undermining me. My mom, well, she was too busy trying to keep the peace, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she was more concerned about Steve and Tyler than me. I wasn't a priority in their eyes anymore. I realized then that if I wanted out, it was up to me to make it happen. There was no one coming to save me. My mom wasn't going to stand up for me, and Steve sure as hell wasn't going to change. So, I started planning. I started saving every penny I could from my part-time job at the coffee shop. I didn't have a grand plan at the time. I just knew I needed to get out of that house. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my friends, not my mom, and definitely not Steve or Tyler. I wasn't going to give them a chance to stop me. Each shift at the coffee shop wasn't just about earning money, it was about buying back my freedom, one paycheck at a time. I didn't care about buying fancy clothes or going out. Every cent I made went into my savings. I didn't need a new phone or a fancy laptop. I needed an escape plan. And when Steve made his snide remarks about how I wasn't pulling my weight around the house, I just smiled to myself. I wasn't pulling my weight, well, he'd be in for a surprise when I didn't have to stick around for any of it anymore. There was a particular day that stands out. Steve, in all his arrogance, had started hinting that I would have to pay rent when I turned 18. "If you're old enough to work, you're old enough to pay your way," he said with that smug grin I had come to loathe. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of controlling me any longer. If I was going to pay rent, it was going to be from my own place. So I found a tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was close to my college, and that was all I needed. The hardest part was breaking the news to my mom. I knew she'd be upset, but I had to do it. I had to stand up for myself, finally. It wasn't an easy conversation. I'd been preparing myself for it for weeks. It was my birthday, and I figured if I was officially an adult, it would be harder for them to argue with me. I went into my room, and as I walked out to tell them, I found the living room in chaos. Tyler had left it a mess, trash everywhere as usual. Steve stood there doing nothing as I picked up after him. "You're part of this family, Ethan," Steve said, standing there, not lifting a finger while I cleaned up after his son. "Sometimes you've got to pull your weight." That was it. I reached my breaking point. I dropped the trash bag on the floor and looked Steve dead in the eyes. "You know what, I'm done. I'm moving out." The room went silent for a split second before Steve burst into laughter. "Oh, really? You think you're ready to live on your own? You can't even keep this house clean," he said, gesturing at the mess Tyler had made. I was shaking with anger, but I didn't back down. "You think I'm not ready? I've been ready for years. You've made my life hell since the day you and Tyler moved in. I've been your maid, your scapegoat, and your invisible roommate. If you think I'm sticking around for more of this, you're delusional. And you know what? The question isn't if I'm ready. It's why haven't you stood up for me? Why haven't you ever backed me up, Mom?" For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead she just sighed, looking up at me. "Ethan, this is a big decision. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "Ready," I laughed bitterly. I've been ready for years. What's the point of being ready if no one's ever stood by me? If they've always treated me like crap? You just sit there and let them talk down to me. You never stood up for me once. Not once. Steve interrupted, of course. Here we go. Poor Ethan, always the victim. Grow up, kid. Life's tough. You're not special. I grabbed my bag and started walking toward the door. You know what? Keep the house. Keep the family dynamic. Keep it all. I'm done. I'll figure it out on my own. And guess what? I'm never coming back. I slammed the door behind me without waiting for a response, cutting off Steve's yelling. I walked out into the night, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The first night in my new place was strange. I wasn't used to the silence. After years of living in a house full of noise and chaos, the quiet was almost too much. I sat on the floor eating takeout because I didn't have a table yet, just thinking about whether or not I'd made the right decision. But deep down, I knew I hadn't made a mistake. This was what I needed: space to breathe, to live, without constantly being blamed, overlooked, and pushed around. The next few weeks were tough, but I settled into a new routine. No one told me to clean up after them. No one stole my stuff, and no one blamed me for things I didn't do. It was peaceful. I started to realize how much I'd missed peace. I didn't cut contact with my mom completely, but I kept my distance. We texted occasionally, and she called a few times, but the conversations were always surface level. She never asked about my apartment or how I was doing, and honestly, I didn't volunteer much. Steve and Tyler, they didn't reach out at all, which was honestly fine by me. There was one night, though, when my mom called late. I picked up thinking something was wrong, but no. She just wanted to talk. She sounded off like she was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. Eventually, she said, "Ethan misses you. He keeps asking where you are." I didn't know how to respond. I missed Ethan, too. He was just a kid, after all. But I couldn't go back to that house, not even for him. I told her, "Tell him I miss him, too." And that was the end of the conversation. That phone call lingered with me for a while, but I couldn't let it pull me back in. Moving out had been the best decision I'd ever made. It wasn't easy, but it was the first step to creating a life for myself. A life free of all the toxicity I'd lived with for years. I kept my head down, focused on school and work. I even started taking on extra shifts at the coffee shop, joined a study group to stay on top of my classes. I was doing all right, building a life I could finally be proud of. But there was still that knot in my chest. The past wasn't something I could just shake off. I had finally settled into a life where I felt in control. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. I was free from the daily chaos of Steve and Tyler's constant manipulations, my mom's refusal to see the reality, and the suffocating atmosphere that had been my home for so long. I had peace, something I'd never experienced before. I was building something for myself, slowly but surely, and I was determined to make it work. But life, as it always does, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old emails, a letter caught my eye. It was from a law firm. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake or scam. I didn't recognize the name on the envelope, and it wasn't like I had any dealings with lawyers. But something told me I needed to open it. I tore open the envelope, and inside was a letter that I would never forget. My great-aunt Megan. Someone I barely remembered meeting as a kid had passed away, and in her will she had left me everything. I stared at the letter, reading it again to make sure I wasn't seeing things. She had left me a house, some land, and a trust fund worth millions. It didn't seem real. I could hardly process the words in front of me. Millions. This couldn't be real. I had gone from scraping by with a part-time job at a coffee shop to being handed a future I never could have imagined. The lawyer who sent the letter, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Halper, instructed me to contact her office to go over the details. I didn't call right away. I told myself it could wait. School was hectic, and I had a million other things to worry about. But deep down I knew the truth. I was scared. scared to face this inheritance, because it meant facing everything I had been running from the family who never really saw me, the sacrifices I had made for people who didn't care. A week later, I got another letter. This one was marked urgent. That's when I decided to take the plunge. I called the lawyer's office, half expecting them to tell me it was a mistake. But no, the lawyer confirmed everything. Megan had left me everything: the house, the land, and the trust fund. I almost dropped the phone. The lawyer told me to come to the office to sign some paperwork and discuss the details. I took the earliest appointment I could, still half convinced it was some kind of mistake. But when I walked into the office, it was like stepping into a different world. Miss Halper, with her sharp, efficient manner, walked me through everything. Megan apparently had been very wealthy. She had invested in real estate, owned several properties, and made smart decisions with her money. She'd never had children, Miss Halper explained, and from what I can gather, she admired people who were independent and hardworking. She specifically mentioned you in her will. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. She had believed in me. She had seen something in me that my own family had failed to recognize. Miss Halper slid a letter across the table. It was from Megan herself. I opened it, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. Megan wrote about how she'd admired my determination from afar, how she had seen the way I kept pushing forward despite my circumstances. She believed I deserved a fresh start free from the burdens of my past. I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I didn't know what to say. For years I'd been told I wasn't enough by my family, by Steve, by Tyler. I'd been made to feel invisible. But here was someone who barely knew me, who believed in me more than my own family ever had. The letter was short, but heartfelt. Megan wanted me to have the opportunity to build a life without the struggle she had faced. She wanted me to have the chance to live without the toxic weight of my past hanging over me. I couldn't believe it. As I sat there staring at the papers in front of me, I realized that this inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about validation. It was about someone finally recognizing my worth when no one else had. Once the paperwork was done, I had access to the trust fund, and the house was mine. The house was located in a quiet neighborhood a couple of hours away from where I had been living. It wasn't huge, but it was perfect. It was a place where I could start over. I didn't waste any time. I packed up my small apartment and moved into the house right away. It felt strange at first, like stepping into a new life I didn't quite believe I deserved. But I knew deep down that this was the fresh start I needed. Within a week of moving in, I got a call from my mom. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. I heard about Megan. She said, her tone sharp. Why didn't you tell me? I could feel the anger rising in my chest. She didn't care about me when I was living in their house. She didn't care when I was struggling to keep my head above water. But now, suddenly, she wanted to know everything about Megan. I kept my voice steady. I didn't think it mattered to you. Well, it does matter, she snapped. Steve and I are struggling to keep up with bills, and Ethan needs new school supplies. You've got more than enough to help. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. It hadn't even been 2 minutes into the conversation, and she was already asking for money. After everything, she was trying to guilt me into giving them something. Mom, I haven't even figured out what I'm doing with all this yet, I said, trying to keep my cool. You don't need to figure anything out, she said quickly. Just help your family. It's the right thing to do. I didn't say anything at first. What could I say? I didn't owe them anything. I hadn't asked for this inheritance, and I wasn't going to give it away to the people who had made my life a living hell for years. I'll think about it, I said. But I already knew my answer. I wasn't going to give them a dime. The calls didn't stop after that. First my mom called, pleading and guilting me. Then Steve called, acting like he suddenly cared about me, talking about how family sticks together. Even Tyler started sending me texts about how he was trying to get his life together and just needed a little help. But the last straw came when Steve showed up at my door. Unannounced, of course. I opened the door to find him standing there, all smiles, holding Ethan's hand. Ethan looked confused, like he didn't even know why he was there. Can we talk? Steve asked, stepping inside before I could even answer. I crossed my arms and stayed by the door. What do you want? He launched into his usual speech about how hard things had been lately and how I could really make a difference for the family. We're not asking for much, he said, smiling like that would somehow make this all okay. I didn't let him finish. You've got some nerve showing up here like this. Where was all this concern when I was living in a closet and getting blamed for everything? Steve's smile disappeared. That was a long time ago. This is about the future. No, I snapped. This is about you trying to take advantage of me. I said I wasn't giving them anything and that I needed him to leave. He tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I told him to get out, and when he refused, I threatened to call the police. That got him moving. After Steve showed up at my door with his guilt trip speech, I realized something: I couldn't keep any part of them in my life. Not my mom, not Steve, and definitely not Tyler. They weren't just toxic, they were relentless. They would never leave me alone unless I put a hard stop to it. And that's exactly what I did. Once I made the decision to cut ties, I knew I couldn't let myself waver. I couldn't afford to keep holding on to hope that somehow things might get better with my family. They'd shown me who they were over and over again, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my life hoping they'd change. I had to protect myself. The only way to do that was to stop allowing them in. The first step was to make it official. I couldn't just block their numbers or ignore their messages like I had before. That wouldn't be enough. They had proven time and again that they would find a way to worm their way back into my life, trying to manipulate me, guilt-trip me, and use me however they could. I wasn't going to let them do that again. I had to draw a hard line. I went back to the lawyer who had helped me with Megan's estate. I explained everything: how Steve had shown up at my door, how my mom had been trying to guilt-trip me into giving them money, how they'd never respected me or treated me as part of their family. The lawyer suggested we take legal action. We filed a no-contact order against Steve, specifically citing his unannounced visit as harassment. It felt like a harsh move, but honestly, it was the only thing that would make them understand that I was done. I also changed my phone number. I didn't tell anyone except a few trusted friends. I had my address removed from public records using a privacy service so they couldn't find me again. I didn't want to live constantly looking over my shoulder wondering when the next ambush would come. I couldn't keep wondering if they'd show up at my door unannounced, or if my mom would send me another guilt-filled email, or if Steve would call me acting like he cared about me when he'd never given a damn before. I thought cutting them off completely would be hard, but I found that the more distance I put between myself and them, the easier it became. I didn't feel bad for protecting myself. They had never protected me. They never had my back. And they certainly didn't deserve to be in my life. It didn't stop them from trying, though. My mom was relentless. She sent me dozens of emails from different accounts, always filled with guilt and manipulation. She wrote about how hard things were for her, how Steve was struggling, how Ethan needed my help. She even tried to guilt me by saying, "You'll regret this one day when we're gone." At first, I skimmed through the emails just to see what new tactic she was using. But then I stopped opening them altogether. I couldn't deal with it anymore. She switched to calling my friends, trying to get them to talk to me. My closest friend, Jamie, told me that she had called him crying, saying, "You need to convince him to talk to his mother." Jaime wasn't having it. He shut her down immediately. "If he doesn't want to talk to you, that's his decision," he said. And then he blocked her number. I could never have imagined my mom going this far to try to get me back in her life, but it was the final confirmation that I had made the right decision. She sent me a letter too through the mail. I have no idea how she found my new address, but there it was, her handwriting on the envelope, clear as day. I didn't even want to open it. But against my better judgment, I did. The letter was exactly what I expected, a mix of guilt, manipulation, and entitlement. She wrote about how hard things were for her and Steve, how Ethan was struggling in school, and how I was being selfish for not helping. She ended it with the line, "You'll regret this one day when we're gone." That line hit me harder than anything else. For years, I had been the one who was ignored, belittled, and used. And now she was trying to flip the script and make it seem like I was the one abandoning them. It was a slap in the face. I wasn't going to let her make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I shredded the letter and threw it in the trash. Then I called my lawyer and asked them to send a formal cease and desist letter. If they tried to contact me again, I would pursue legal action. The silence that followed was blissful. No calls, no emails, no letters. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel like I was being suffocated by them. I finally felt like I could breathe. Cutting ties with my mom. Steve and Tyler wasn't easy, especially with my mom. There were moments when I would wonder if I'd gone too far. But then I would think about all the years I had spent being overlooked, blamed for everything, and constantly made to feel like I didn't matter. I remembered how my mom had never stood up for me, how Steve had constantly belittled me, and how Tyler had trashed my things without a care in the world. I reminded myself that cutting ties wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting myself. They had made it clear who they were, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my life hoping they'd change. The only person I even considered reconnecting with was Ethan. He was just a kid, and I didn't want to blame him for the actions of the rest of the family. He had written me a letter once, apologizing for asking me for money and saying he missed me. It was genuine, and I could tell that he wasn't part of the manipulation game that his parents and Tyler played. But reconnecting with him meant opening a door to the rest of them, and I wasn't ready for that. Maybe someday when Ethan's older and can reach out on his own terms, we can talk. But for now, I had to keep that door shut. Life went on. I didn't think about them much anymore. I had built a life I was proud of. I had a good job, a few close friends, and a sense of peace that I had never had growing up. Cutting ties wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. Walking away wasn't just about survival. It was an upgrade. For years I had been running on fumes, but now I finally had the chance to hit reset. This was my life, my rules. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up for you. And if they weren't going to be those people, I'd find others who would. And then just when I thought the storm had passed, something unexpected happened. I got another letter. This one wasn't from my mom, Steve, or Tyler. It was from the law firm handling Megan's estate. And when I opened it, I discovered something that would change everything once again. Stay tuned for the final chapter, where I reveal how I learned the final truth that shook me to my core, and how it changed the entire trajectory of my life.